All right, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you are new. I'm going to talk a little bit about, real quickly, slight adjustment to Breya, and then this video is actually going to be about Kess, and I'm going to run through quite a bit of Kess gameplay. So I want to hit the adjustment to Breya quickly since the last video was primarily Breya focused. I got some good feedback in the comments. Ido Sherman had suggested a couple of cards that I like and also pointed out a mistake on my part, which was that I was thinking that Urza's Saga gets on 3, it gets a CMC card, 0 or 1, but it doesn't. It actually gets an artifact card with cost 0 or 1. In other words, if an artifact has a mana color in the cost, then Urza Saga cannot retrieve that card. So the card actually has to be a brown artifact in order for Urza Saga to get it. And what that means is I was pretty pumped because I thought that it could get Portable Hole because Portable Hole is an artifact and its CMC is 1, but it does not go by converted mana cost. So again, it will not retrieve a Portable Hole. It has to get a card like Soul Ring or Skull Clamp or something that actually costs 1 colorless mana, or a card that costs 0 colorless mana. So correction on that point. The other two cards that he suggested, I think he had 3 or 4 things that he had suggested, and I agreed with some of them. Certainly willing to try them out. One of them is Solve the Equation. I think this is probably an oversight on my part and probably will become a staple. And the other card was Prismatic Ending, and that may actually fall into the same class of cards. And the reason is that I was reading Prismatic Ending wrong as well. I was reading Prismatic Ending as a card that, so exile target non-land permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast a spell, and it's white and X. So what I was thinking Prismatic Ending did was if a card costs 4 mana, I thought you would have to spend white, and then you would have to spend 4 different colored mana for X in order to exile the card. So in my case, that would be white, and then white, blue, black, red, and then I could exile a 4-drop. That is not correct. So if that were the case, I don't believe this card would be very good at all, honestly, because you would always be spending more mana than the casting cost of the thing that you need to exile. Actually, what it is exile the permanent. Basically, the X just exists in Prismatic Ending to allow you to put more mana, to put more colors into the spell until you reach the casting cost of the thing that you need to exile. So, for example, if you need to exile a Soul Ring and you spend exactly 1 white and X is 0, that's all you need to spend on X, because once you've spent 1 white, exile target non-land permanent if the mana value is less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast that spell. Well, you've spent 1 white, and 1 is equal to or greater than 1. So therefore, for a single white, you can actually exile a turn 1 Soul Ring, making this card extremely good. The fact that it'll take out basically anything that isn't land is super valuable, but being able to do all that while taking down a first turn Mana Crypt or first turn Soul Ring makes this card incredibly good. Or if, let's say, they play a turn 2 Dark Confidant, you hit your second mana for a white and a blue, for example, you Prismatic Ending the Dark Confidant, and you drive on. Basically, what it comes down to is just X cannot be paid with colorless mana here, or at the very least, it doesn't do you any good if it is. Now, this card actually exiles the permanent if its value is less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast it, which means that you can target something, and let's say the opponent has a, I don't know, the opponent has a uh, uh, I don't know, what would be a good example? Let's say the opponent has something along the lines of an Eldrazi in play, some gigantic thing, and you spend a single white and you target it with Prismatic Ending. Well, your total casting cost will not surpass the casting cost of an Eldrazi. However, so what will happen is the game will allow you to play the Prismatic Ending, and it will allow you to target the Eldrazi. It just simply will fizzle. So that comes into play a couple of different ways. If your opponent has a way to redirect, so for example, if your opponent is playing with the red redirection spell, they can redirect Prismatic Ending to a non-land permanent that you haven't paid enough to exile. So that is one potential downside to the card. So for example, they have a 1 mana Soul Ring and a 4 mana 2/2, and like whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so you spend 1 white and you target the Soul Ring. They can redirect it if they have like a misdirection effect, and make you target the forecasting cost thing, and then prismatic ending will allow that, and then it will just fizzle. Um, Now, because it's target non-land permanent, if all they have is a soul ring in that scenario, and then a bunch of lands, they cannot redirect it to land because it's not a valid target to begin with. So that's where the difference between how this card works and how a card that requires you to pay the mana to target a thing works. And where this might come into play in this deck specifically, besides that scenario where your opponent is retargeting your spells, is that we're actually playing Dak Faden. So if you ultimate Dak Faden, for 1 white, you can actually target something that Prismatic Ending cannot exile. And due to Dak Faden's ultimate, which says that you get an emblem whenever you cast a spell that targets one or more permanents, gain control of those permanents, what will happen is you can Prismatic Ending and just take control of any permanent on the board except for lands. And if, of course, you spend a single white and you Prismatic Ending a 1-drop, you won't take control of it, you'll exile it. But if the card costs more than 1 mana and you target it with Prismatic Ending and Dak Faden's ultimate is active, then what actually happens is you trigger Dak Faden's clause and Prismatic Ending fails to exile the card, but Dak Faden steals it and it now belongs to you. So that actually is really cool that you get this little secret synergy built in just by playing this card. It also is essentially a Vindicate for non-lands that you can fetch up with a Spellseeker, and that's pretty amazing. So you can get an instant or sorcery cost 2 or less, which means you can go get a Prismatic Ending to get rid of like a Planeswalker or something down the road. You can Spellseeker, grab Prismatic Ending, and then on your next turn you can remove the Planeswalker or whatever. And just having that extra flexibility is really nice. So while I was initially on the fence on the card, I was on the fence about it because I misread the card and dismissed it immediately out of hand due to misreading it, and having it pointed out to me actually made the difference. So I have currently added, as I said, solve the equation, which I think is just fantastic. And of course, it can go get the prismatic ending, but it can also get demonic tutor, any instant or sorcery, which means we can go get any of our, our bombs. We can get mind twist or whatever. We can get DT and then tutor chain into whatever we want, or vampiric, for example, imperial seal. Maybe we don't have enough mana for a DT. But we can also go get something like Force of Will. I'm actually a suggestion made to me was to remove Merchant Scroll in order to play Solve the Equation, but I actually don't think that's correct. I think you play both. And the reason is that Merchant Scroll has become even more powerful in time due to cards not like just Force of Will, but also cards along the lines of Fierce Guardianship and Force of Negation. The fact that you can, well, first of all, it's blue that you can pitch to the force cards, but also the fact that you can merchant scroll for a card like Fierce Guardianship and then play your play your Breya and have it be protected with a preemptive negate for 0 is very powerful and very good. And of course, on turn 2, if you merchant scroll for mana drain, often you can present a situation where your opponent cannot really afford to run anything into your mana drain. So you go land merchant scroll, go get mana drain. They do whatever signet or whatever. You untap, play a land, and now you sit on a mana drain. Sometimes you may not even have a third land, you just have the mana drain. But even in that situation, it's very dangerous for opponent to make any plays whatsoever because they might supercharge your deck. And because they can't make plays, you therefore have more time to draw lands off the top and continue to hit your land drops, which just further would. So essentially, it acts like a kind of like a standstill effect that prevents your opponent from playing cards or punishes them if they do, allowing you to get into a game where you might miss a bunch of land drops, and normally that's just death for a deck like this. But having that ability to do on just 2 mana into a drain, very powerful. I don't believe that Merchant Scroll is a card that will ever really be cut as long as mana drain, Force of Will, and stuff are legal. And of course, you can Merchant Scroll and then you can like mystical tutor for like a tithe if you need to hit lands. That's also a little bit of a chain. It's not the greatest, but you merchant scroll on 2, and on 3 you upkeep mystical tutor, draw, cast tithe, get some land drops, and continue to play Magic, which is good. So we want those kind of capabilities. So I think just adding yet another demonic tutor. And if you could solve the equation, because it gets an instant or sorcery card, any with no restriction, it's basically a spell seeker, which we're already using, that gets an instant or sorcery with 2 mana or less and leaves behind a 1/1 body. And you lose the 1/1 body, but you get the ability to pick up instants and sorceries that cost 3 mana and up. So you get the ability to go get like Fierce Guardianship and Force of Will. You get the ability to go get Factor Fiction on curve. So essentially on 3 you solve the equation, and on 4 you Factor Fiction. You get the ability to go solve the equation into some of our other, like solve the equation to fabricate into Crypt or something like that. So that capability, or just like top deck solve the equation, go get a Vindicate and get yourself out of a bad spot, or in this case a prismatic ending, depending on what's better. So super cool. I love the suggestions. I've added the suggestions. What did I cut? I cut Treachery, which I do not feel good about, but I don't necessarily feel bad about. The problem with Treachery is it's completely insane and completely free when it resolves, in most cases, assuming you have enough lands to untap. But even when you just get the rebate, you untap like 3 lands, it's just nutty powerful. But while it's incredibly good when it resolves, the fact that it's a 5 mana sorcery can be a real problem against when you're in situations where you just can't afford to tap out, because if they have a counter spell or some kind of removal in response that doesn't let you untap, there's a massive punish coming your way. So it's an incredible card, and I'm not saying that it doesn't belong in here. It very well may belong. It's also pretty cool under Winter Orb. And of course, when you can cheat it with like a Soul Ring or whatever, the card just seems brilliant and totally insane. Um, but I had to pull something, and given that I'm adding essentially removal for majority of creatures that I'm going to have to worry about in the format the way that it is now, in the form of prismatic ending, given the fact that I added removal that can target creatures, I figured I could safely take out removal that can't, excuse me, that also can target creatures, and I end up roughly even on that. But what I lose in raw power, because Treachery is just insanely powerful, I pick up in flexibility. The ability, like I said, to kill a turn one Soul Ring is worth more to me than the ability to steal a creature on 5. So I made that cut. And then for the for the solve the equation, the card that I took out was just Fracture. Or you could say that Fracture and Prismatic Ending is the swap, and Treachery is the swap for solve the equation, however you want to look at it. But I look at it this way, that the Prismatic Ending replaces Treachery, and that solve the equation and Fracture gets swapped. So basically the idea here is that solve the equation can go get a thing that Fracture could target, and allow you to deal with things in that manner. But there are going to be times when you don't have any targets for Fracture, you have no use for it, and in those cases, solve the equation is just strictly better. It's easier to cast. And remember, we're often getting Soul Ring and Crypt into play, so it's a lot easier to cast a blue and 2 than it is a white and a black with off-color cards. It's also another blue card our uh, for our Force of Will effects, which is important given that I pulled the Treachery out, so we maintain roughly the same blue count. And blue count is certainly important. You do need to be somewhere. I feel you need to be as close to like 30 as you can get. And this deck's at 29, so it's 26 plus 3 there. I don't think that I have any other blue. Yeah, no, I think that's it. So very close to 30 cards, roughly, or higher if you could get there. Roughly a third of the cards in your deck need to be land, and roughly a third of your deck cards need to be blue for Force of Will effects. So that's kind of doing it there. A suggestion was to cut Liquid Metal Torque. I don't think so. I think that card's actually like ridiculous, and it's one of those cards that doesn't feel ridiculous necessarily. However, it actually it actually is. It's one of those cards that on the surface of it, like, it's easy to misevaluate how good the torque is. I think it's actually quite a bit better than it looks, and probably a card that just always belongs. Unfortunately, we hit all these cards that feel like they always belong in the deck, and I'm running out of leeway on what to where the flex slots are. Another possible suggestion was potentially just cut Stoneforge Mystic. That's a card that we could cut if we want to cut Stoneforge Mystic for a, let's say we feel like for some reason there still aren't enough disenchants. We could cut Stoneforge Mystic, put it into disenchant, or Seal Cleansing or something. We could cut the Mystic and go back to running the Treachery. We could do things like that. However, for now, I have left the Mystic. The thing about the Mystic is it's not great because we only have two, you know, two equipments, and we don't have the Sword of Feast and Famine. So it's not like helping us cheat the Orb like or get a Disrupting Scepter effect that generates mana, which is just a crazy card. However, what Stoneforge Mystic is doing here is that there are times where the Breya deck does kind of like you've done a lot of early exchanges, and particularly now with the addition of more 1-for-1 cheap removal spells. So you do a lot of early exchanges, and there's like a flurry of back and forth. They're attacking your mana, you're attacking their mana. They're trying to get ahead. You're trying to stop them from landing any haymakers. At the same time, they're doing the same to you, and you kind of get rough parity. And then you may even have like somewhere in there you've used Breya typically, and you've got like some 1/1 flyers sticking around. You get a Stoneforge Mystic down, and you immediately draw like 2 to 4 cards off of Skull Clamp because that's the main target for it against one of those control matches, and you blow the opponent out. Like if you can draw 2 to 4 cards, uh, you just generally win like on the spot with no investment, right? Like you're drawing 2 to 4 cards without spending a card. You're actually because you're just killing tokens, or you might be killing like a thieving skydiver who's already done its job, or that kind of thing. And the Stoneforge's ability to just go get Skull Clamp, it's just this is another card drawing engine. So because it's a card drawing engine, the games where you draw both and you can't Stoneforge with them, you have to draw both and hit the Stoneforge and not hit like a brainstorm effect that allows you to put one of them back into your deck. And if all that happens, sure, it kind of sucks. But even then, sometimes you can use the card as bait. They don't know what you have in your hand necessarily. Maybe they haven't Gitaxian probed or whatever. You play the Stoneforge and use it to try to draw out counter magic. And sometimes it will actually draw out the counter magic because they know that once the Stoneforge hits, not only are you getting card advantage, theoretically, right? But also, they don't know that you've drawn your equipment, but also they can't counter your equipment once it's in play, and that can sometimes be a reason for them to be willing to counter it. So the fact that this is a very cheap card that you can essentially bait a counter spell out with, it's really good against blue. The fact that Umezawa's Jete is essentially our main life gain spell outside of Breya's ability itself. That's pretty much it for the deck. And we are running Necro and Toxic Deluge and everything. And Jete also just breaks the back of some decks. Like sometimes Stoneforge into Jete and then they just can't do anything, right? Like you get an active Jete going in, like you don't have to do anything else. Pretty much that one card just dominates the entire game. That that ability to do that, I think means that Stoneforge stays, but if we had to make a cut, I could be argued into cutting the card, but there would have to be something really tremendously good to replace a card that is tremendously good, like Stoneforge Mystic in this deck. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at with the Breya deck. Now I want to talk about Kess because that's the main purpose of this video. So hopefully you've sort of borne with me as I discussed what's going on with Breya, because I'm really excited actually. I really like this deck is really feels good. It feels a little bit fresh with all the changes, and it's just doing so many excellent, powerful things now, and doing it very, very efficiently. It feels honestly pretty great. So I'm going to switch gears though to a deck that also felt really insane, and that was the Kess deck. The Kess deck is deprecated now. What you'll see right now is that I have Ragavan in here. Ragavan does not. May not actually belong in Kess, but it was actually quite a bit better because we have all this cheap early disruption to push Ragavan through, and then you could just do some really busted stuff with that. Um, so if it belonged in a control deck, this would have been the one. But it's grayed out right now because I've loaned it out to Brian because he was playing with it to see what he thought about it. A card that's not in this list that probably should have been, almost certainly, was Expressive Iteration. This card's pretty nutty and really nuts when you can double up on it. The other card that is, you know, uh, an illegal, yeah, not in your collection, and in this case, not legal in this deck's format anymore. And a card that kind of like put this deck all together was the Hull Breacher, which is not in here. You can also see that some of the cards that I've just added to Breya. So, for example, the Solve the Equation, the Urza's Saga and such, would have made the cut here, and also I think the expressive iteration all would have potentially made the cut here and made the deck even stronger. However, those cards have those cards most likely teachings would go. It's just too slow, and a few other changes. But with the banning of Hull Breacher, maybe this deck isn't necessarily where we want to be. The thing about the Hull Breacher is that it just Hull Breacher was the most powerful version of and cheapest version of the three effects, the Hull Breacher, Notion Thief, Narset plan. And so without that, I think, by the way, the basic island would just be Urza. There's definitely some changes that could be made here very easily. We could solve the equation, take out teachings, and we could do Urza Saga, and take out the basic island. There's probably some other changes that would have occurred to this deck had were I to continue to build upon it. But at any rate, with Hull Breacher banned, I'm not sure that this deck necessarily survives. You could try running it, like you could take out Hull Breacher and you could just try running a little extra card selection and try to pull it off with just a few less cards or whatever. But I'm not convinced that that necessarily is good enough. And so for now, I think the deck is essentially dead. But I do want to run through the second half of the video that I promised to do a couple videos ago, actually, and that is the video in which we run through the Kess battles with Dr. Evo. So we had, was it Dr. Evo? Yeah, I believe it was. So we had, you can see there's been a big break. For those who don't know, I'm in the process of uh, moving overseas, so I will still be making videos and everything, but we're actually getting on a plane in like less than a week, so it's going to be this is why I'm glad I got an opportunity to get some videos out now, but it's going to be a challenge for me to try to keep up on it, and it has been very difficult lately for me to keep up on the channel simply because primarily because of the move, but also I was getting a little burnt out, to be honest, of the Hull Breacher meta. It's not really a fun way to play Magic for me. It felt somewhat mandatory. I hate when combo feels mandatory, but when combo gets too absurd, you kind of have to just accept it. You can't fight it after a certain point. You just have to realize that like that is the best, and you just have to try to build your version of it. And then all I was ever facing was I was using my Hull Breacher deck to constantly face other people's Hull Breachers decks, and it was just incredibly tedious and I don't know, not to my liking, but I can understand that others may have felt differently. I'm just, telling you how I felt. So I really like, even though I was super busy and unable to play, I also didn't care that much because playing lost a lot of its luster. It just wasn't that fun in that meta. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and spin through though the Dr. Evo games. And I believe last time, last video, I'd done just a little teaser with the couples and here, and then finally we hit the string of heavy sort of Dr. Evo marathon games here. And so we will now check those out, and this will be the closer to that, to the Hull Breacher Kess era. Hopefully they don't unban it. So we'll take a look and see how this goes. And here we go. So I'm going to pause and we'll just run through all of them. So for the first, now if you don't remember in the games against Dr. Evo, what he was trying to do is he was trying out various decks looking for solutions to the problem that Kess was presenting, and he wanted to see how his various decks would fare. So I was fine with it, and he played um, as many different ideas as he felt like, as many times as he wanted to, and so that's what we're going to check out here. All right, so I decided to make it looks like a pretty risky keep, but it's incredible payout if I can hit. And look at that top deck, just insane, right? I kept it because of the Force of Negation and Force of Will, and the fact that just one mana of any color was all I needed. And I just really hit right on time there. Now look at that. If I had been able to play Deflecting Swat there, that would have been gnarly, but I didn't have the mana for it. I impulsed into it. So fortunately I chose, Fiery Islet instead, and, Development continues apace. You can see my opponent has 2 mana. My opponent's Thalia not looking great against my 7 mana here, so we're going to upkeep and grab a Mind Twist and just break the opponent off with Dump Truck their hand. And at this point, it's 2 planes and a Relic Seeker plus Thalia facing down my hand. But my opponent runs out of Saracenda and I end up having to force a will. Uh, so an incredible top deck from my opponent actually strips 2 cards out of my hand and leaves me with a pretty weak board situation here. So because I'm holding the Skydiver and I let them Relic Seeker into this Sword of the Animist because I actually want a target for the Skydiver, so I do not duress it out of their hand despite the fact that I could have. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and steal that thing. And of course, at this time, the deck has exactly 1 basic land in it. So the fact that Sword of the Animist allows me to seek out a basic land when I attack could prove to be quite valuable to me here. So I don't trade with. Oh, so I do trade with their creature, even though I want to attack, but I do it because I'm planning to play Spellseeker and then re-equip the Sword of the Animist. And then my opponent gives me a Fact or Fiction split that ends up being uh, a 5-0 split, I think. And I have to I'm going to go ahead and close this game out because basically right here I'm able to get Spellseeker down. Next turn I equip it, I attack, I get another land. The game's basically over. I mean, the best he can do is put out Thalia. And then short order, Kess comes down, and then I start to get to play all this nasty stuff again, and the game ends. So we'll just move on to the next game there because I think that Factor Fiction messed up the replay there. So we'll move on to the second game here against Dr. Evo. So this is technically, I guess, the 4th game, but it's the 2nd game after I had the interrupted string of games. And another pretty nuts hand. Remember, this time Dr. Evo was playing Edric. This is a little bit of a risk, just like the last one was a little bit of a risk. This is one of the reasons why I like the Breya deck at 31 lands now versus the Kess deck, which was at 29. And look at that, my opponent has a Daze from my Coalition Relic, and suddenly my insane hand is feeling really scarily weak. But I do draw a land here, so I decide I'm going to strip mine. Opponent folds some mana, so we'll just roll with it, and then I'm going to go ahead and duress my opponent, and I'm going to pause. And what my opponent reveals is Dispel, Lotus Cobra, Kira, Great Glass Spinner, Opposition, Island, Spell Pierce. So out of all those, they also had, I guess, a Signet, Arcane Signet. So I took the Signet because my opponent's choking on mana. My opponent has a Spell Pierce that I can play around, and a Dispel. But as for the rest of their hand in general, like it's looking pretty good. Now that I know what they have in their hand, I can play accordingly. So top deck Ragavan here, which is very good. And I played the Winter Orb out there. So here, look at my opponent cannot dispel this, nor can they pierce this. And I find myself an opal that they can't deal with. And then you see, I can just pay for it. So he makes me pay for it. But yeah, and then I get to run out Ragavan. So the pierce is gone, the island is gone. And at this point, my opponent's still missing land, and now I get to start bashing him with the monkey and taking over the game. So Dr. Evo just concedes, and we move on to game 3. And I believe this is Edric again as the commander. I think he played a couple games with each. I think. Yeah, so Edric again. I have to take a mulligan. I mulligan into this. It's good to have a braid, basically. So, I'm not feeling too bad about it. My opponent has a, roaring out the gate start with a Spellseeker right away and then gets Daze. So now I've got this annoying problem where I can't actually kill the crypt. So I let my opponent flip, and I decide what I'm going to do is I'm letting all this happen, right? Like I can't really interact with this, but I'm actually able to force a negation the Oko, and then my opponent decides to Daze and actually frees me from the Daze prison that I was in, which is not a play I agree with. I was intending to cast a Braid to try to draw out the Daze, but yeah, this way at this point I get to Dak Faden and steal, and although my opponent can attack and kill Dak Faden, now I'm going to be able to get next turn I get to abrade something and play Kess, and basically the game's over. And with that little mistake there, I think Dr. Evo just scoops it up. So we move on. That was these two. So we move on to game number 5. I'm going to start doing them by timestamps. It's just easier. So 7:57. So we'll move into that one there. And and very solid hand. This time I'm playing against Rankle, Master of Pranks, and I get Thought Seized, and I have combo pieces in my hand that I can't. Uh, Once they're gone, right? The Tormod's Crypt. So, and then I get Mind Twisted, but my opponent did not thought seize the Dark Confidant. A very interesting choice, and it turns out it's because he has removal. So I just Hail Mary a Time Twister. He decides not to crypt my graveyard and just leaves it there, I guess, for when I try to do something with Kess, and pushes out a Rankle. So Rankle is now going to Flying Haste. Whenever it damages me, they get to make each player discard a card, each player lose a life and draw a card, each player sacrifice a creature, and they can do um, any or all of those things. So discard, card draw, and edict. Affects both players, so he's probably not going to edict. So he makes us both discard and just sticks with that. So I throw away Signet because unfortunately I would like to throw away the diamond, but I need the diamond here um, because uh, I'm planning to uh, basically set myself up. I was trying to dig and at the same time set myself up with the mana drain and because I'm kind of in a situation where I really want to play my commander, but my opponent's playing mono black with lots of removal, and I feel like if I play the commander without, first of all, I need something in the graveyard, and I need enough mana to where I can like play the commander and attempt to time twister in order to get the crypt off the board, and then secondly, I need to be able to play the commander and protect it with the mana drain. So I run it out this way. Opponent runs out demonic tutor and then goes for a vampiric tutor, which is really interesting. I figured a DT for something like a duress effect, but does not. However, it does make me discard here. I've got the fetid pools; they can go away. And it is now time I decide to Narset. And yeah, so let me back up. So I decided to Narset to see if I could find like removal or something before I was hoping to kill the crypt before I did the Kess, but I actually Narset into the second half of the combo. I just pull Wheel of Fortune naturally, and that's about it. My opponent was holding some removal over there, but now my opponent has no cards in hand, and so despite the fact that I actually got Mind Twisted this game, I got Mind Twisted, but Time Twister and Wheel of Fortune are pretty good cards and have allowed me to recover. So at this point, my opponent has no cards in hand. I'm rebuilding my hand. I go for crypt removal so I can finally do something with my commander once I can get some stuff in the graveyard. So go ahead and put a ponder in the graveyard there. I've got mana floating, so we can just ponder once more. And I go ahead and wasteland their workshop. And at this point, we've got a pretty good amount of containment going. I've got a force so that I can stop something like a Necrobotans off the top, Narset to prevent something like a Night's Whisper, and upkeep, I'm going to go ahead and tutor up See the Truth, essentially an ancestral recall once I get my commander down. And once you're casting ancestral recall effects, you're pretty much won in your control battle against an empty hand, so as you can see. So still have force and negation up, and finally my opponent concedes, which is really amazing because, like I said, my opponent had anti cast recursion and, you know, I mean, he exiled 14 cards and had the, well, 13, I guess the 12, my bad. Ponder and See the Truth he didn't exile, but anyway, I did. But my opponent has a ton of cards to exile from my deck and Mind Twisted me with a early, set of tutors and such. Had a heck of a start, and the Kess deck is just so resilient that I win this game at 757. So we move on to the next game here. And of course, he's changed commanders. We'll see if he continues with the mono black commander or not. Yep, still playing his Rankle Master of Pranks deck. Look at this nasty combo. Liquimetal Torque and Dak Faden, right? So I go ahead and just keep. And my opponent, yeah, rituals out a Crucible of Worlds. That kind of changes. I was thinking I would like do a Torque Faden type thing, but top deck a Arcane Signet here. So I'm actually going to Torque into Arcane Signet and present a possible counterspell for my opponent's consideration. And my opponent then plays a Bitter Blossom, which despite them getting multiple lands per turn, the Bitter Blossom is most likely a bigger. So I'm going to pause for a second. So I go ahead and play Kess. Because I have deflecting SWAT and my opponent has the Bitter Blossom, it's going to force them to get a 1/1. So if they have a card that cannot kill black creatures, then they can't target Kess. But if they have a card that can kill black creatures, more than likely they're going to attempt to kill Kess immediately. And thanks to them having the Bitter Blossom, I can then deflecting SWAT their target over to Fairy Rogue. Unless it says something like target opponent sacrifices a creature, which I could not target my opponent with. But just about anything else I can retarget over to the Fairy Rogue. So I make this play here with the game plan of eventually stealing Bitter Blossom with Dak Faden. And the reasoning for that is that Rankle has to damage your opponent in order to do its thing. So by putting Kess down now with a way to protect it, I'm decreasing the chance that Rankle's going to get through and be a problem for me. And then later on, if I steal Bitter Blossom, then I have even more protection for me so that Rankle can't do anything. And essentially, my opponent will have disenchanted their own commander, as it turns out. So that's kind of the idea behind that. And of course, I have to allow my opponent to generate card advantage via lands, thanks to Crucible. But at least this way, and as it turns out, there's nothing to swat here. So at least this way, though, we're in great shape. So thank you. I'll just take that Bitter Blossom. Opponent DTs and goes for a go for the throat. There's the SWAT kicking in and die Fairy Rogue. And then tries to Demonic Tutor again, or Grim Tutor in this case, which is obviously fine. I was tapped out, but I have Remand and I find a counter spell with Deck Faden running. I can now just draw plenty of cards and I'm in great shape. I can, of course, deflecting SWAT if my opponent tries to make a play on my turn. So just for sheer tempo, I go ahead and Remand their End Dynamo, and then my opponent just replays it. And, or no, plays Rankle here. I'm, of course, going to chump. I can do that forever till I run out of life, which is basically the end of the game. And so I can now Imperial Seal and Dak Faden. And in this case, I find Treachery, the card that I was thinking about cutting earlier. Put a Mana Leak on top of my deck with Mystic Sanctuary, Treachery their commander, and untap my lands here, and then attack with Kess. I can also flashback Imperial Seal if I want, although I have a Mana Leak on top. I'm not going to do that just yet. So the other thing that I can do that's kind of interesting is I can flashback Remand. So with Kess, you can like make a play, Remand the card back to your hand. Remand gets exiled, but the original play that you made doesn't get countered, of course, because it's Remand. It goes back to your hand, and you draw cards. It's just a way you can draw a card. Typically, the kind of thing you do off of a very cheap spell, or the kind of thing that you would do if you're facing another blue deck. You might make a play, and your opponent attempts to counter it, and then you Remand it back into your hand. I've demonstrated that before in the channel, but that's something you can do from the graveyard with Kess, which is kind of cool as long as you're playing the card in your turn. But anyway, yeah, Liquid Metal Torque, totally doing exactly what it's in the deck to do there and acting as a de facto disenchant for enchantments in a deck that normally would struggle. There's very few enchantment removal cards in blue, black, red. So anyway, moving on to the next game here, Dr. Evo switches over to Narset, but does not have a fast draw, and I have a disruptive draw, so we're gonna Thoughtseize, and we'll see what we see here. And it turns out my opponent kept Darksteel Ingot and it mulliganed into just all mana. So an all mana hand, probably not gonna beat a start like mine that contains a Demonic Tutor and lots of fast mana. You can see the old mystical teachings there, not being as good as it could be, but fine. And the card actually makes even less sense in Kess, as it turns out, just because Kess already has the ability to replay cards. So why do you need a card that has the ability to replay itself? So anyway, but neither here nor there. So my opponent actually is able to get a Narset down here, or would be able to get to Narset down, except that I do have the mystical teaching. So I'm gonna go ahead and just force that. And I'm kind of out of gas right now. And I've got the teachings in the graveyard, but I just rip Winter Orb off the top and run out of Talisman into Kess, into Demonic Tutor, into Winter Orb, presumably. We're gonna. So basically, what's going to happen is we're Demonic Tutoring. We have 1 mana left for artifact spells, and so I would go get removal for the Lantern, most likely, and then just go ahead and slam the Winter Orb. Opponent gets to untap just the Lantern and maybe the Ancient Tomb, plays a land or whatever, and then on my turn I get to take the Chromatic Lantern with Deck Faden, for example, and win the game from there. So Dr. Evo concedes for that game there. That was at 8:24, so we'll go to the next one. And we've got this game here at 8:30, and we'll run through it. So putting Kess through its paces. Golos, next opponent. So I have to mulligan, going down to 6, but this is at least playable hand. It's got a sort of a fast start. When you use Workshop to play like a Signet, it is fast in the sense that you get 2 permanents into play, but it's not totally fast in the sense that unless you draw another artifact, the Workshop, which I did here, so that makes a big difference. The Workshop's not, at some point it stops working, like it stops doing something. So when the Workshop stops producing mana, then your fast start stops being fast. Now, of course, a deck like Golos always has the commander that it can go get, so it's much stronger. But here, what I end up doing is, as you can see, I just put together the strip mine lock very quickly and efficiently. And thanks to Workshop's ability to play the Crucible, I'm able to lock my opponent out of the game. Uh, or at least he didn't want to stick around and wait to top deck artifact mana and try to win it that way. So I don't blame him either. But I was all in on that play, right? I was basically out of gas. However, if my opponent didn't give me targets for the strip mine, I would replay it just to protect it from like a Bajuka Bog, but then eventually get cast down, and then I can cast Imperial Seal and then reload my hand, or dump truck my opponent's hand with a Mind Twist. So either way, it was over, but but uh, as I said, you're never really like completely out of gas with Kess, provided you have something you can do in your graveyard. So it's a little bit different than some of the other commanders. Anyway, Dr. Evo starts up another game, this time with Golos once more, and has an amazing start. 4 mana on turn 1 is bad news for me, especially going second. It means Golos is coming down on turn 2, and oh my gosh, a strip mine too. He decides not to strip mine here, which is a little bit sus, and goes and gets a command tower here. Also, I don't know what's in my opponent's hand, but this, I might have, in their place, if I weren't going to strip mine, I might have played the strip mine and used it to go get a wasteland, and then just aggressively go after the opponent's mana. But it seems to be working fine for my opponent. You can see it's a really rough situation here. Opponent gets Crucible now, and now has Crucible Strip going, and I'm definitely in a lot of trouble. But I do get the deck fade, and I decided that what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take Golos and allow Crucible Strip to continue, just because it takes a ton of pressure off me, and I have alternate mana sources that I can play. So I Hull Breacher, and my opponent has no response to it, and I get to deck fade and taking 2 cards out of their hand and making 2 treasures, which is really huge for me. So and then my opponent for their turn, gets a tutor in response and then goes for a Bolus Citadel, which is totally insane. Uh, it's an insane card, but it's also an insane play because I have active deck fade and with 2 counters on it. I just steal the Bolus Citadel. My opponent would have had to have comboed me out right then or found a solution for deck immediately. And if the Bolus Citadel, let's say the top card was like Ponder or something, the Hull Breacher is suppressing the opponent, so they couldn't really do anything about that. And so even though I just killed my opponent, Dr. Evo, with a Crucible Strip Lock in his game, where he gets 4 mana going first on turn 1, sets up a Crucible Strip Lock, I'm actually able to weather the storm and win the game comfortably in charge. And I thought that was just super cool. And once again, the kind of decks that we play, like Crucible Strip, can beat him, but it doesn't necessarily mandate that you lose. We design our decks to try to survive in the face of a situation like that. And in this case, lucky for me, it all comes together, and thanks to a really good tutor for deck fade. All right, so 841, going to play again, and here we are. It's my son in the background. Do you want to wave, Thomas? Do you want to say hi? There you go. All right, so we're going to lead off with a Thoughtseize. This time my opponent's commander is still Golos. I take a personal tutor out of their hand because their hand looks a little bit slow, and the tutor seems to, most likely they've got Bolus' Citadel, which is not what they want, but then my opponent draws a Brainstorm, unfortunately, and everything I think I know about their hand is now irrelevant. However, I do duress the opponent again, and so now we get to see what's going on over there. And this is what I see. And we'll take out the plains. And here we are. Opponent's got 4 cards in hand. There's 1 card I've not accounted for, the Flooded Strand. And um, what you can see is that although I've picked apart my opponent's hand, my opponent managed to recover it completely, and I never drew a second land. And now, of course, my opponent's going to be able to vampiric tutor and just sort of do whatever they want with me. Um, in very short order, the opponent can put together a Bolas' Citadel or Golos or whatever. More than likely, what I expected is that my opponent, if they're smart, if which I give Dr. Evil credit for being smart, right? So he's almost certainly going to Vampiric Tutor during upkeep and then draw a Strip Mine or a Wasteland, kill my 1 land, and then I'm just completely out of the game. So this is the game where I conceded, and this is a game where you can see that playing the 29 lands versus 31 really hurts me. And of course, thankfully, now we've got Urza, so there are definitely reasons to play more than just 29 lands. 29 is the minimum, I think, lands that you really need to play control. If your opponent's not disrupting you, and you need, assuming that they're going to play a couple of wasteland effects, 31 therefore takes you right back to 29, which is the minimum you need to play control in most cases, from my experience. And again, nothing is a rule. These are more like rules of thumb. These are estimates. And so anyway, all right. So I lose that 1 game to Dr. Evo. Shake it off. We start up another one. And this is, what is this? This is the first one after the loss, so 845. And we'll spin through this. And what have we got here? We have got another round of Golos. And I've got a very serviceable, not insane hand whatsoever. This is just completely fair, right? As in not doing any broken stuff. I do get to disrupt my opponent a little bit, and I have the top. Opponent kind of counteracts with the disruption of their own, but I just top in response. It's not really the greatest strategy for my opponent, but I can see the reason for doing it. I go ahead and just tuck a couple of cards and pass. So the reason that I don't keep Vandal Blast is that despite how good it is against Golos, is that if there were a Soul Ring or a Crypt that were going to come down, it would have already come down. So the opponent hasn't drawn it yet. So I'd rather just dig deeper and try to find cards that allow me to generate enough of an advantage that instead of waiting for a target, I want to proactively dig for power play. So my opponent ETs and goes and gets Omniscience. So I'm expecting Show and Tell. So I impulse into Fact or Fiction, but I'm quite concerned now because I really don't want to force a will. I do find a Dak Fade in there, so it looks like I am going to have to force a will, and I don't actually see the Omniscience that I was expecting. Opponent just runs out a few more cards. I let him potentially copy the top there, copy top. Anyway, and go for Dak Faden and then steal their Lantern, just a smidge better than an Arcane Signet. And yeah, my opponent Grim Tutors here, strangely enough. So I'm assuming at this point, if they're going to combo with Omniscience, now's the time. So I'm kind of out of time. I'll use black mana from the fact that Urborg has made Confluence a swamp, so I don't lose any life there. I'm going to go ahead and shuffle and then draw some extra cards, and ta-da, solution obtained. Twist my opponent for 3, and yeah, what happened there? It turns out that whatever he had somehow managed to get the Omniscience out of his hand because, wait a minute, let me back up. Hold up. What just happened there? I'm actually missing something because I didn't quite catch what happened with the Mind Twist. So I apologize. That actually happened a little bit quickly there for me. So what did happen there? I'm thinking that this might be a bugged replay because that doesn't make any sense. Why would I have not? I would have Mind Twisted and forced. My opponent has 4 cards in hand according to the counter. It looks like what. Oh, I see what I did. I didn't Mind Twist because I could play Tezzeret and lock him under Orb, and then Mind Twist him the next turn. And sure enough, you can see that's what happened. Yes, I played Tezzeret, orbed them down so they wouldn't have enough mana for an Omniscience Show and Tell play, And then that way on their next turn, they just don't have enough mana to do anything. And then I get to follow it up with Mind Twist. So I actually get one more card that way. I get Trinket Mage, Replenish, Omniscience, and Show and Tell. This is all quite lethal from opponent to have no cards in hand. And I've got a Force of Will, Active Tezzeret, and all that good stuff. So we're in great shape. And of course, in the current version of my control decks, a Tezzeret here would, if there's no map used up, would be able to go get Expedition Map. Map would be able to go get Urza's Saga, and Saga would allow me to put a two giant 6/6s into play, at least with the number of artifacts that I have here. 5 plus 7/7s, I guess, or 6/6s. I guess they'd be 7/7s because they would count each other. Plus, when you sack the Saga, you would go get an artifact. Plus, I have 5 more artifacts. So I'd be able to put 2 giant 7/7s into play just using Tezzeret's fetching ability and win the game that way. Or I could plus up Tezzeret over the course of a turn and go get a Crucible and then just Crucible strip my opponent to death. So Dr. Evo concedes there, and we move on to the next game. So 8:55, we've got a few more Dr. Evo marathon games. So hopefully you're enjoying yourself. Kind of a funny way to close out a Breya video, but so be it. I may throw a Breya. We'll see how I'm feeling at the end of this. If I'm feeling froggy, we'll throw a Breya. This was actually the game we already saw, so let me back up. I may throw a Breya video on just to show you with the changes in place, just that you can see the absolute most current version of Breya in action. But in the meantime, Dr. Evo here, 8:55, still playing Golos. Feels that I think maybe Golos is best deck, and maybe correct too, just because of heck that right there. Just the ability to workshop decks are just so good quite often. I drew a wasteland there that's fairly useless in the face of a Crucible, but I also drew a tutor, and if you can tutor against Golos and get a attack fade into your hand, that is almost always the right thing to do. So I go ahead and slam and steal. And now I'm set up with Wasteland Lock. My opponent could run out Golos, but decides to fabricate into Bolas's Citadel, which actually makes a lot of sense. But I just am able to ramp ahead here, preordain into a Force of Will. Basically, a Mystical Tutor and then preordain a Force of Will into my hand, and then start Strip Lock under a Winter Orb. And at this point, my opponent is completely locked out of the game, and we move on to the next one. You can see very rarely am I actually utilizing Kess in these games. In the games against like some of the harder decks, there's really just no time to use your commander much, if at all. And so the deck itself has to be able to win without the commander, which is one of the things I do like about Breya because Breya has additional tools to enable that to occur um, with all these new flexible removal cards. Anyway, so we start another game here, and I lead off with the Ponder and then get a Liquid Metal Torque out. Opponent just fetches, and for turn 2, it's got a Arcane Signet, so good stuff. And that torque ramps me and allows me to actually Skydiver right here or play Urza. So I decide, Skydiver is the best choice. Mana ramping and theft is just incredible. I've got a Strip Mine that's ready to do what Strip Mine does. Um, and then we pass. My opponent does actually accelerate here with a Soul Ring into a Talisman of Dominance. So it's actually got tons of mana, and so their Golos is going to be pretty hard to stop. For my part, I just go ahead and copy the Soul Ring, play a Relic, run out the strip, attack, and pass. So this way I can sit on a remand. I go ahead and play a Mystic Sanctuary after thinking about it. Opponent goes for a Bolas's Citadel. Oh, of course, remand and hope. And now I'm in a bit of trouble because I don't actually have a solution to the card right now. I do fortunately draw a Expedition map, and map allows me to play Urza, map, and wasteland my opponent's Urborg, and take them down to 6 mana and not having triple black, but opponent top decks a black or had it, and is able to play Bolas's Citadel. So now things are looking pretty scary. Opponent then plays a Diabolic Tutor off the top of their library for 0 mana, plays a Mox Opal, plays a Trinket Mage for free off the top, is able to start using Sensei's Divining Top, and Impulse, and go absolutely nuts here. And yeah, so totally going crazy here. Coalition Relic, Copy Artifact, Soul Ring, Limdol's Vaults. Like, basically I'm dead. But I'm not going to, I'm not going to concede yet because they are at 6 now, 5 life, now 4 life. What are they looking for? 3 life? And I'm trying to figure out exactly what my opponent's looking for. Plays a Mana Vault off the top, plays Personal Tutor, is at exactly 1 life. Fabricates, Hardcast Fabricate, goes and gets the combo card that he needed to have gotten long ago with Bolas' Citadel to make an infinite. With Bolas' Citadel, Sensei's Divining Top, and Aetherflux Razor, you kill as many opponents as you want. But look what happened. He tutors and has exactly Mana Vault, Mana Left 3, and not 4, and has to pass for the turn at 1 life. And guess what? I've got attackers. So crazy enough, my opponent finally pulls off his combo and then it doesn't execute it correctly or something. I don't know exactly how that went wrong. But I'm able to get a win that I didn't honestly deserve, but it's a win nonetheless. And sometimes it is one of those cases where you don't necessarily always want to just scoop to a combo in action until you actually get the kill. And it's one of the reasons why you don't. So anyway, Golos once again, he was feeling pretty bad here, and then he has to like triple mulligan, and I've got a very solid start. Looks like it could be a Breya hand. All right, so I'm going to preordain. I want the Abrade here because one of the few ways that my opponent can recover from this weak start would be to have an artifact here. This is perfect. I drew a Inquisition, so now I'm able to tutor for a Crypt, Crypt for a Talisman, and Talisman into a Inquisition. And Inquisition actually hits. I get an Enlightened Tutor, leaving my opponent with just a couple cards in hand. Opponent then DTs, so he's got whatever he tutored for in a Tarnished Citadel, and that's it. So now I run out Opal, and I can just Spell Seeker into a Counterspell if I wish, or a Mind Twist and just take both cards out of the hand. And with the twist on the stack, my opponent down to just 3 mana and nothing. Whatever it was, his best card now hitting the graveyard. Dr. Evo scoops it up there. So it just leveraged a poor start from my opponent into a pretty straightforward win. But it's always good. Like you certainly want to be able to capitalize on good luck on your part or bad luck on their part, which in this case it was just bad luck on his part. So, all right, playing again. Golos some more. So I have to mulligan here, and I'm going second. Never the best situation. Opponent Vampirics. After they tutor, I decided to use the Strip Mine, in the hopes that whatever it was that they tutored for would require the land, and that I'd be buying time. But no, my opponent's got Crypt and Trophy Mage, and puts together a yeah, Trophy Mage, which gives mana value 3. So gets a Crucible of Worlds. So that Strip Mine a complete waste, and my opponent has Strip Mine. So at this point, I am Strip Mine logged out of this game. But I'm going to play it out. So I've got Tomb and I've got Torque. I run out Arid Mesa and pass. Obviously, if my opponent had Strip Mine in play, they could strip, and then I would fetch in response, and then they could strip afterwards. But since they don't have 2 lands in play, I actually get a window of opportunity here. So I'm going to take it, and I take it by actually stealing Mana Crypt so that I can get back into this game. And now I've got 5 mana to my opponent's 3, despite the fact that they've got Crucible of Worlds Strip Mine running. Of course, that mana is going to start disappearing. So, problem. Opponent goes for a Ritualed out Phyrexian Metamorph. Copies Crucible of Worlds for safety's sake, which I'm okay with, and I choose to trade my Skydiver in for their Trophy Mage. All right, so I'm taking damage from Crypt, but at least I have, and I actually have to play lands here, and the reason I play a land here is because of Notion Thief in my hand. Opponent, I'm going to go ahead and float some mana, and then just kick out the Notion Thief. It at least gives me a decent combo potential, but my opponent just has Toxic Deluge, so I wasted a land for nothing. Top deck a Dimer Signet there, really nice, and the Signet actually allows me to spin out Kess, and so I now have a Force of Will that I cannot play, but I've got an active Kess, and my opponent's actually still strip mining me. But if you think about it, I'm going to pause the game for a second. Remember when your opponent is doing this to you, that yes, they are accumulating card advantage because they're playing strip mines that don't exist, right? They're replaying the same strip mine over and over. So they're not playing lands from their hand, which means they're accumulating card advantage in that way. But although they are accumulating card advantage, they're not actually accumulating mana advantage, right? Um, Basically, if the situation were reversed, let's say I had a Crucible of Worlds and a Strip Mine, and every turn I played a Strip Mine and I destroyed one of their lands, in that scenario, the board would look exactly the same. So it literally, by doing this, my opponent, who's behind on mana, is actually strip mining himself over and over and over again, because every time he could be making a land drop, instead he's making a strip mine and then sacrificing it. So he's making no land drops, and that's like the third or fourth, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and I strip mined one, so 5. So that's 5 land drops that my opponent has not made because he continues to hammer my land drops. And after the flurry of strip mines is resolved, I'm still up on mana thanks to the Thieving Skydiver. So this is actually, normally it does make sense, and maybe it does make sense here, but it doesn't make total sense. Now, the one good thing for my opponent, of course, is that I have Kess, but no cards to flash back at the moment. So we'll see. We'll see how this works for my opponent. But just keep in mind that in terms of tempo, my opponent is not actually getting ahead on tempo. They're gaining card advantage at the expense of tempo in this specific situation, right? So now the Mox Diamond does change the equation slightly, because the Mox Diamond allows them to hit a land drop while hitting a land drop. It allows them to play the strip mine. So they do actually get ahead that way. So, and then I think he misclicked though on the Mox Diamond. Something goes wrong, and he doesn't actually have, either doesn't have a land to play, or something happened there. Some kind of misclick. Because it doesn't resolve. I hope we're not bugged out. We very well might be. I'm going to try to skip ahead. Oh, yeah, it looks like we're okay. Yeah, so we're back to the game here. Opponent made that misclick with the Mox Diamond, but it doesn't matter that much, because they do have the Crucible thing going. And I, of course, just keep drawing blue spells, which is great for Force of Will, but not so great when you actually need like proactive plays. I think we must be hitting bug territory here, because it doesn't make sense that he would tap the mana like that. Yeah, for no reason. Okay, we're bugging out. But anyway, I remember having to Force a Will to protect myself, and then at some point I draw some kind of card advantage engine. I don't remember what it was. Spell I can double cast off Kess or something along those lines. Um, and I end up basically somehow crawling my way out of the fact that my opponent has Crucible Lock on me. And I end up winning this game, like as you can see by the results. I'm sorry that you weren't able to see that. That would have been fantastic. It's one of the games that it was one of the games on the list that I was most keen on showing you, because a lot of people will immediately concede to Crucible Lock, and I don't think that that's correct to do um, in every scenario. And that was certainly one of them where it was not right to do. If you have any mana at all, stick around. You might find a way out of it. Anyway, all right. So Golos again with Dr. Evo, and I've got a very solid start here. Obviously, with multiple tutors and half of my combo, I can just potentially put together the other half, and we can just call this game a wrap. So I'm going to attempt to do exactly that. I'm going to start by getting Mana Crypt. Now I've got plenty of mana, and what I can do here is just try to push with the Dak Faden, because this will draw out a Force of Will if my opponent doesn't have one, and if they do have one, then I can just make my hand. I can craft my hand, and I throw away the counterspell and the Tezzeret, because I'm planning to reset my hand anyway here, so it just doesn't matter that much. So I'm going to go ahead and expedition map into a strip mine again, just stalling. Throw away some other cards. I'll keep the Force of Will here, but it's not that important. DT for Hull Breacher. So now I have Force of Will, Hull Breacher, Wheel of Fortune, and of course Hull Breacher. Dak Faden is pretty gross too. And if I had a top deck a land there, or a blue card there, I was set. I don't, so I have to wait one more turn to pull it off. I use Dak Faden instead to dig up a blue card. Opponent gets a mana vault there. Obviously, I was hoping he just tapped out for Golos and I force it and win. But I just go for Hull Breacher anyway, because I've got the Force of Will backing it up. And from here, I Dak Faden my opponent to get a couple treasures so that I have more mana, and then I cast Wheel of Fortune. And no, it resolves. Opponent has nothing to say about it, and at that point, the game's over. The stupid Hull Breacher combo. takes the game. So we just quickly and easily win that game just due to the power of Hull Breacher and a handful of tutors. We're almost done with the Dr. Evo marathon. All right, so now, as you can see, we've got yet another Golos game. And you can see how consistent this deck is, even with 29 lands. It's pretty consistent. It's just there was slightly too many mulligans, and I do think 31's better. And of course, Urza's Saga is just the stone cold nuts. Anyway, um, so easy to do, but you can see the beginning of the game in most games in control battles actually look a lot like this. It's usually a flurry of disenchants and strip mine effects in which you're attempting to disrupt the opponent, because if they can't get started, then it buys you time and then you can make a haymaker play. And although I actually had the ability to slam Jace there, I was really hoping my opponent went for Golos and that I could just mana drain. But if they didn't use their Grim, then I had this ability to do exactly what I just did here and change up. Since my opponent tutored, I get to change up what my play is. And so, funny enough, I have turn 2 Jace, as you saw, but because of the mana drain and the interactive cards that I had, I actually chose not to take the Jace line, and I actually think that this worked even better. So, you can tell me what you think, but I just, very cool, right? So if my opponent had slammed, gone Grim into Golos, then of course I just hoover up the mana, upkeep, Vampiric Tutor, use it to play like Gilded Lotus into Jace, and just win that way. So super awesome there. And 947, here we go with one of the last Dr. Evo games. And this time he switches over to Taigam Ojutai Master. I'm not exactly clear on what. Instants and sorceries and dragons cannot be countered if this thing's in play, and they can potentially gain rebound. This is a 4-drop, so it could be very hard to stop this thing from getting into play. I go for a Grim Monolith here. My opponent has a Mana Leak, which it's correct to Mana Leak a Grim Monolith there, because if you don't, you might not be able to Mana Leak the follow-up play due to the fact that Grim Monolith produces 3 mana and would pay for a Mana Leak. So now, of course, I know that my opponent's going to potentially have their commander here, so I'm sitting on my own Mana Leak / Remand, hoping desperately to draw a land so that I don't have to discard for the turn. That worked out fine. It did come into play tapped, unfortunately, but we'll get there. I play Expedition Map. This is, of course, these days with Urza's existing, this looks like we're probably going to get a. This looks like we probably have a bug, because I would have slammed the Verdant Catacombs there. But anyway, it looks like with the Urza, well, maybe we're not. Maybe I held it for some reason. I must have thought that I had. Oh, I held it because of Weathered Wayfarer. Okay, I was waiting for my opponent to play another land. That's what it was. So anyway, like I was saying, though, Map is a card that you kind of have to counter, and of course with Cavern of Souls and stuff, it just puts even more pressure on blue decks. So my opponent has actually out countered me this game. They have played, what is it, 1, 2, 3 counter spells. I finally play my first one, targeting Crucible of Worlds, and it resolves successfully. So far I've played the Weathered Wayfarer game very well in this particular set. Uh, and I am just being very patient. I now have a Snapcaster Remand. I've got Guardianship, so I'm mostly okay. We'll go ahead and remand the Chromatic Lantern just for tempo. Now I've got a Fire Ice if I want to kill the Weathered Wayfarer. But also, what I'm hoping to do is actually Snapcaster kill it at some point during combat. So we'll go and run out a Dynamo here. I could play the Crucible, but I need to be able to play Fierce Guardianship and/or Snapcaster. Opponent runs out Brawl, goes for a Lantern. That's all fine. And it doesn't attack me with the Wayfarer, so annoying. So I just play the Snapcaster, what the heck, and I'm going to flashback a fire here, take out the Wayfarer, just because now that I have the Crucible, suddenly I want to be able to play lands. It's more important that I can. And of course, here I get Kess down. I now have active Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Swat, which is super gross. Opponent plays Geist the Saint Shaft, not much of a threat here. They would just swing into Snapcaster or Kess. Geist has the same problem that Ragavan has, which is that it has to get into the red zone. So it's powerful and threatening. But now look here, my opponent tries to actually play a card on my turn when I have counterspells in the graveyard and a Kess in play. That's not going to be super effective. I go and remand it to just draw extra cards and then allow it and shackles away my opponent's Baral here. Uh, did I allow this? I don't think I do. I may have Fierce Guardianshipped this. Uh, I'm not. I'm not clear on if I actually countered this or not, but it's at this point in the game where my opponent concedes, and can't exactly blame him. So, and I think thus concludes the Dr. Evo Marathon. 9:47 there. Oh, it looks like we had exactly one more game. Oh, this was a couple days later. So that was it for the Dr. Evil Marathon scenario, and everything after that, just more Kess, and then we finally you can see various wins. The win rate on Kess was extremely high, and then we finally switch over to Breya, and I play a little bit, get a couple of losses here. I think I spun through those in the last video with the um, version of the list. It wasn't really complete, if you want to call what it is now complete. And then with the current version, as you can see, I've played quite a few games, doing fine yesterday, and then made the adjustments today. So I will spin through these 4 games that I ran through today with Breya as a bonus add-on, just because I've talked about both decks, and Kess is basically dead anyway. So we'll talk about we've already talked about all the changes here, and so this will be just a bonus 4 games with this current version of Breya, just so you can kind of get a taste of it, and then in future videos you will see a little bit more of the Breya gameplay with these adjustments, which I'm very excited about. Actually, I really like them, so I definitely appreciate the comments uh, in the suggestions and keep them coming. So anyway, Coliseum here is playing Ragavan, uh, probably the best red commander. However, I've got a very acceptable start, and I get first turn Mox Diamond with a Braid, so I get to right away kill the thing. This might have been a little premature. I could have waited till turn 2 to kill it, only so that my um, so I'm just fetching here, and I was thinking I was going to go get the blue, red, white land, decide that I'm going to go get the underground sea. And the reason that I do that is because I'm actually planning to, I was actually planning to, um, and I don't Imperial Seal there, but I was actually thinking about whether or not I wanted to go get Necropotence. So opponent goes for a Pyrokinesis. I allow it to happen, plays a Rampaging Ferocodon. I think that in hindsight, probably I should have Imperial Sealed for Necro, but there's time. There's time. We'll get there. Oh, I think what it was is I didn't have the third black yet, but I got the second black specifically, and then top deck the third black. So that's the deal here. So I can use Jace for tempo here. My opponent Fiery Confluences me, which hurts because I have actually just tutored for the Necro. So now I have to use Jace to find mana. But Jace is pretty good at doing exactly that. I go ahead and fabricate here and get an Arcane Signet. So if you notice, I'm not sending in the Thopters because I don't want to get hit with Ragavan on dash. Opponent does a Chandra plus and just does damage to me. It doesn't allow him to redirect it to Planeswalkers anymore. I plus Jace and tuck a Sulfuric Vortex. Phew, mega dodged a bullet there, and then I'm able to cast my Necro. And then once Necro's down, as we've discussed, essentially the game is over. I go ahead and attack Chandra once. If my opponent wants to kill a Thopter and hit me with a Ragavan here, at this point I'm okay with it. So instead they exquisitely Firecraft Jace's face, for my turn, I get a workshop into Breya and do a little brainstorm action, and then Necro. I over Necro because I actually don't want the cards on top of my deck, so I just over Necro to go past them. Attack the Chandra there and pass for the turn. I'm going to grab the cards I don't want, +1 that I was hoping I did want. It was just more land, so not super exciting, but at least I got through that glut. Opponent sacks the Chandra to finish off Breya and plays a Frostodon, which means that I'll take more damage from playing a Breya due to the Frostodon being in play. But it's not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and strip mine my opponent, just contain the resources a bit here, and then for my turn, I decide to just run out Breya again. I'm going to take some damage, but I want the Frostodon off the table. Um, and Breya's ability to gain me life is very powerful if I can get the Frostodon off the table, since it says players can't gain life. For my opponent's turn, they just play Ragavan and hit themselves for 1. I don't even Necro there because I've got enough cards to win the game, and I just I just didn't want to take any more damage. It was a little bit premature to stop necroing. I probably should have just necroed for one there and just picked up the extra card. But with Fierce Guardianship and a Breya and this many, like, we'll look at all these life sources. I can kill that thing with 2 of these and then gain 8 life and basically draw 8 more cards off necro and still have the same life total. And that's not even counting the fact that we have Stoneforge here and we can go get a Jete and then permanently just dominate the game, as I said, what Jete does earlier. Um, yeah, at this point we're just done. So we move on to game 2 against Coliseum, or Colossum actually. There's no E in there, so it's Colossum. And once again, opponent's playing Ragavan. This time they go first, so turn 1 Ragavan, and I don't have any like interaction here, but I do have a nice speedy start, so we'll go ahead and ponder, and there we go. Find myself a Toxic Deluge. So I set it up so that the top card of my library is now land. And the reason I do that is because Ragavan will exile the land for me, and then, so that's what happens. They exile my land, and then that'll get me to the next spell. And they cannot, of course, play my land, even though it's a red fetch. It's just not super helpful to them. And I go ahead and run out some extra mana and Deluge before Ragavan gets out of control there. And my opponent could dash Ragavan in here, or even hardcast it off the treasure, but then I can just play Breya. Instead, my opponent plays Katha the Hammer and hits me with a 4/4 Mountain. So for my turn, I'm going to just, like I said, play Breya. I've got Ancient Tomb up. The worst thing that my opponent could do would be hit me with a Blood Moon effect here. It'd be really awful. Instead, they Magma Jet Breya and then Pyrite Spellbind it, and of course I sack it in response. Deal 3 to that thing there, and I actually let my copy artifact go. Take a hit from the mountain, but at this point Koth is now down to 2 counters, which is what I was banking on. I tithe to refresh my mana base a bit, just so I can hit my land drop, and then we'll go ahead and attack and kill Koth, and follow that up by mind twisting my opponent's hand. So I've taken a boatload of damage. I'm down to 13. I can take even more from Mutavault or Ragavan here. Opponent just hard casts it. Oh, dashes it in rather, and hits me and exiles. And this is so painful. They hit me, get 1 treasure, and exile Vandal Blast to kill my other artifact, which is just awful. So luckily I top deck a land, but it was just incredible timing. So the last card in my opponent's hand is now Ragavan. I play Breya again. I could lose here. It'd be really easy for my opponent to just draw Price of Progress and kill me. If it happens, it happens. But if it doesn't happen, I almost certainly win the game here. It doesn't happen, so my opponent scoops. All right, last 2 games, and we are done. I've got Forever Sleep, and then we'll queue up Wizard 103, and that is it. So hopefully you've stuck with all this. This is a bit of a madhouse of a video. All right, so, this opponent was playing Krenko. I was very happy with this draw going first, but my opponent actually was the one going first. But it's still a very reasonable draw. I get out Hallowed Fountain, play a land, play like Arcane Signet or one of my talismans, tutor for board wipe, play a bunch of mana sources, wipe the board, and then from there Breya takes over. So opponent just, I don't know, they just didn't want to play it out or whatever. So we move on to the game against Wizard 103, and that's it. All right, so I have to mulligan, and I mulligan into this very reasonable hand here. My opponent's playing Ludovic Necro Alchemist and Tavesh Sat Doom of Fools. So we'll find out if it will be, sorry about that. My opponent will be the fool, or will I? I could Mystical Tutor on turn 1, decide not to. Unfortunately, I top deck Enlightened Tutor. You don't really want to get like Mystical, Enlightened, Vampiric. Well, you do because they're powerful. But if you have them, you can't, you have to play them over the course of multiple turns. So anyway, I Demonic Tutor though, and I get a Crypt, and I Crypt into Arcane and pass. My opponent does me a huge solid here and plays a 3rd artifact in play. So at this point, Mystical Tutor is just going to break my opponent off. And that's exactly what it does. You should know, of course, what I fetched. But for those who are curious, the card was Vandal Blast. So 2, 3, 4, 5, boom, boom, boom. I leave my opponent with just Sulfur Falls as their only permanent, and it is game set match at that point. And then of course I have Enlightened Tutor. What would I Enlightened Tutor here? Well, I've got 1, 2, 3 black. So if my opponent continued to play the game out, of course, what I would do is I would cast Liquid Metal Torque, Talisman of Progress, pass, Enlightened Tutor, end of their turn, my turn. Or actually, you know what I would have done? I would have played Talisman of Progress, cast Breya, pass, untap, upkeep, Enlightened Tutor with the Talisman of Progress, and then draw, and then cast Necro and fill my hand up. Use the Crypt to play the Torque, win the game. So that was the next turn after the Vandal Blast turn, but my opponent doesn't stick around for that, and I don't blame him. Anyway, this deck is a Vandal Blast to play, so hopefully you have enjoyed watching the Kess follow-up that was promised, as well as the Breya evolution here, as we're pulling out cards that I'm not even sure necessarily are going to be permanent cuts, but we're trying new things, trying new cards, and I love the fact that despite all of the years of Magic, with all of the good cards that exist, we still have the ability to find things from new sets and play with them and see. We can always constantly adapt. One of the things about the deck style gameplay is that classically, the deck, the problem with it was that every time they printed a solution to the deck, what happened is the deck just said, "Oh, that's a good card. I think I'll play that." So you would say, "Oh, we've got Gorilla Shaman now. It destroys. We've got Mox Monkey. It destroys Moxes." And the deck would say, "Oh, well, that's the perfect tool. So in the mirror match, I think I'll take that." Or when my opponent gets a fast start, things of that nature. Um, and in fact, here we are, fast forward to current times, and you've got all these beautiful white cards that deal with turn one Soul Ring, which is the most threatening, Soul Ring and Crypt, which is the most consistent thing that this deck does, and the most threatening thing that it does. Just gets way ahead of you early on in mana, as you saw a Demonic Tutor for Crypt quite often, or Vampiric or Seal for it. And now I've just been able to take the same cards that are potentially the solution to the problem, incorporate them in my deck, because they are also, well, they're the solution to the problem, and I'm going to be faced with that problem as well from competitive decks. So now I'm essentially pre-sideboarding against myself, and that's pretty cool, actually. So hopefully you enjoyed all that. I'm excited about it. Please continue with the comments. Thank you very much uh, for uh, for all the words of encouragement. It's really nice, especially given that I haven't been on the channel as much. And again, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.